So this actually is our first mixed program with virtual and in person here at the History Center. It's our last Florida Conversations for the 2020 and 2021 season. And we could not be happier to have Chip Weiner as our guest talking about his work with the Burgert Brothers Photographs. First, I'd like to thank WSF Public Media for their sponsorship and USF Libraries, who we do this in concert with. We've got no more Florida Conversations for this season. We'll start again in September, but we've got some exhibits coming up here at the History Center. We've got a map exhibit on the Florida Territory opening in July, and we're really excited about an exhibit opening up in February of 2022 on the Cuban diaspora. So kind of keep those things on your calendar. We also have summer camps coming up, so please visit the History Center's website, and you can learn about the summer camps coming up, as well as any programs we have coming up in the future as well. So we want to get down to the business of why we're here today, and that is talking about the Burgert Brothers photograph and the modern kind of reproductions of those photographs that Chip has done. So to introduce our speaker today, I'll give you a little bit of information about Chip. So Chip's day job is as a mental health professional, currently working in private practice in Tampa. He's a former intelligence officer and psychologist for the State Department, serving at U.S. Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base. A former lead trainer at USF's Department of Public Health. He's currently the mental health coordinator for Hillsborough County Regional Critical Incident Response Team, a volunteer position aiding first responders in West Central Florida following line-of-duty deaths and other critical incidents. He began his photographic journey after getting his first film camera as a college graduation gift. Chip is a biker and has had the same Harley Davidson for 30 years. You see him around the neighborhood every now and again. His writing led to his first professional photo job shooting for a motorcycle magazine in the 1990s. Thereafter, he was hired to shoot for Creative Loafing newspaper as a photo blogger, which led to a 12-year stint with them as a photojournalist and food photographer. He's also an educator, developing much of the educational programming at the Florida Museum of Photographic Arts. He also taught at Tampa Art Institute and still hosts the longest-running Intro to Photography class, Photo 101, in Tampa. Thousands of students have passed through this class, getting their first taste of shutter speeds and apertures. Along with the current Burgert Brother project, he shoots for Lens on TampaBay.com and continues in commercial food photography. As a Google local guide, his images have been seen over, this is an impressive number, 73 million times. And his work has been published in Creative Loafing, Tampa Bay Times, the DuPont Registry, and Shutterbug magazine, among others. He is as passionate about photography today, some might say obsessed, I wouldn't say that.
My wife would.
As he was the first day he saw a picture develop in the darkroom a few decades ago. And so, but today, again, in addition to all of that, we really are going to talk about this book, which is Burgert Brothers, Another Look. And so, Chip, thank you so much for coming here and chatting with us.
Yeah.
So what is this book, and what really prompted you to write or to photograph this book? And you did write a bit, and we'll talk about that as well. But right. To tackle kind of reimagining and rephotographing the Burgert Brothers' work.
It started a year and a half ago-ish. I was working on another personal project of shooting portraits of creatives in the Tampa Bay area. And so if you are a creative in the area and want to participate in that, I'm going to start that back up again as we get some relief from the COVID restrictions. Got a call from New York. A man said, hey, listen, I'm doing he's in commercial real estate. I want to really promote what's happening in Tampa because I want to do some commercial real estate down there. Do you have any photographs of Tampa, modern ones? And then I told him about the Burgert collection because I had seen it before, but I hadn't really dug into it. And so as I did for him and also for myself, I was able to learn about the photographs are all in the public domain, so they're available to the public and to anyone who's interested. And we'll talk about how to access those here in a few minutes, but most of them are through the Hillsborough County Public Library. Some of them are also through the USF digital collection. I started looking through those, and what I saw was, I've been in Tampa since 1964, and I would see one of the images, and I would say, man, I remember what that looked like back when I first saw it, and I wonder what it looks like now. And that was sort of the inception of the project. It was not intended to be a book in the very beginning. I just wanted to shoot it and see what it looked like and sort of hold them side by side. And as I got more and more into the collection, the obsession deepened, and so off I went into taking a look at some of that.
That's really incredible, and that is one of those things. You look at those photographs, and you really do want to know what's there now.
Yeah.
And so often, unfortunately, it's not what's in the photograph. I do want to say to the folks both here in person and who are watching this live, either through our Facebook or through Zoom, we would love to hear any questions you all have. We'll be kind of collating them and getting them together. So toward the end, we'll start hitting Chip with those questions. But please feel free to ask those questions now. If you are watching virtually, keep them in your mind. If you're in the audience here, we want to make sure that we have a discussion as well, because there's so much more to talk about here than we probably have time for.
Right.
We want to make sure that if anybody has any questions, we want to tackle those. So let's talk about the process.
So the idea was, again, I wanted to replicate exactly what the Burgert Brothers did. I saw there are a few books out there. Some of them are really good in reviewing the collection, but I didn't see many publications with good photography, with good modern day photography. So the idea was to go and stand exactly where the Burgert stood, and having that image in front of me, do my very best to try to replicate it. And I'll talk about what some of that process looked like. But that was the idea behind it. How do I get that same shot and give it a modern day look? And so there was some back and forth as far as how that happened. This first slide obviously is of the Burgerts and some of the family. This is not all of them. Over the course of their history, the Burgerts had folks outside of the family who worked with them as well. They were around from the late 1800s to around 1960. And over the course of that time, accumulated over 19,000 photographs. That collection sat for a long time once the business shut down in file cabinets and in people's garages and in really bad environments. When the Burgert Brothers started, they shot not only on glass negatives, but once it went to film, that film was volatile. And so those prints started to fall apart, and there was, really a lot of destruction that happened with that. Fortunately, there were also collectors around who they would go in and look at the collection and buy some of them from time to time. Tony Pizzo, who was big in Tampa history, did some of that. And some of the other folks, Mr. Bunch, I think was his name, who owned the North Tampa Photography Store, was involved in preserving some of them. And eventually they all ended up in the collection, or most of them in the collection at the Hillsborough County Library. And from there, they have done a lot of work, not only in conserving the images, but also in printing them and making them available to the public, which is where any of us can access all of those. And I could spend an hour just talking about the Burgerts and how they did things, but nonetheless, they were perfectionists as photographers. They had the latest, greatest equipment. They had the greatest photographers, the greatest people working in the darkroom. We'll talk here about retouching and stuff, but that's sort of how they started. So this is a slide really of some of their cameras, and you can see many different sizes. The really tall one there, hopefully you can see this online as well, was called a circuit camera, and what it would do is take wide panoramic shots. And so some of the ones that you'll see in the collection they're very narrow but very, very wide. And so it's really cool stuff to see just in the panorama. And so they always had just the greatest camera equipment and the best people working for it. This is sort of an iconic shot. And you can see him standing up on the top of his roof. And there was a reason for that, which I'll talk about in a second. This is a photographer from Robertson and Fresh, they were friendly competitors to the Burgerts, but still did some absolutely brilliant work back in the day as well. And you can see that they are both standing on top of their vehicles. The reason that they did that was, and by the way, here you can see, this is what all photographers try to avoid, is getting your shadows in the shots, but here they are with this. They also try to avoid getting the reflections in the windows, and yet there it is on this one as well. So again, imagine what it was like back in the day to see these folks, because photography was really coming of age when the Burgerts were around, and to see these people walking around, standing up on top of cars and taking shots. And as you can see in some of these, I mean, here's this guy up on top of this car, and as you look through the collection, what I did, they term it pixel peeping, because the original image that you see is relatively small, but I was able to get enlargements and actually look into the detail of many of these prints. And so looking through this and seeing the way people dressed and just seeing their interactions with the Burgerts and stuff was part of the thrill of doing it. And so as I looked through the collection, again, here's this guy. What is this guy doing standing on top of his car? That was down in Ybor City. And this one as well. This one is, this bank actually used to be where the Wendy's is now on Kennedy Boulevard, right by the Walmart. And again, here's a painter up in the top, just watching what's happening. But I think even more importantly, I don't know how well you can see it, but here's a guy over here in the corner, obviously a black man standing out of the frame. And it speaks really to much of our culture and at some level those who are disenfranchised really from the mainstream. And I don't want to make this political, but it really gives you a window into the way things used to be. As I was doing the research on this book and looking back into mostly a lot of the newspaper archives and could see some of the words that we used culturally and stuff, it's amazing, really, compared to what we do today. But that was part of the thrill as well, just to be able to look back in the 20s and 30s and see what was happening in the newspapers as well as some of these photographs. Please.
And one thing I want to interject, because when you look through the Burgert Brother collection, you really don't see a lot of black faces. Again, as commercial photographers, they were generally hired to shoot the photographs that they shot. And they generally weren't hired by African-American companies. That doesn't say that that didn't happen. There actually are several photos in the collection that clearly they were hired by an African-American company to shoot some photographs. But the vast majority of those photographs were taken, kind of by whites for whites. And so you really do have a skewed sense of what the city looked like when you only look through the Burgert collection. But it's really, it's a casualty of the time versus something I think that was anything that was intentional on their part.
If you go to the Hillsborough County Library page and look in the Burgert collection, they actually have a tag there for African Americans, and they shot schools and things like that outside of hospitals and such. But yeah, it just really speaks to the history of how all of it happened. Mm-hmm. Part of the reason that you would put a camera on top of a car is to avoid this. This is called parallax distortion, and all that means is, and I'm sure you get this with whether you're shooting with your phone or with the camera, when you're down low and shooting up, you get this angled, it's just lens distortion. But if you're able to get up higher and shoot straight on instead of straight up, then that reduces a lot of this type of distortion. And so that was one of the reasons that they shot from on top of the car, and part of the reason I tried to replicate that was because, again, I wanted to get the actual photos of what was happening, not fix it all in Photoshop. So this is sort of an extreme example, but that's one of the reasons that they were up on top of the cars. So the idea was I broke out my film camera, and I'll show it to you, and turn my kitchen and my bathroom into a dark room, which my wife absolutely loved and supported me every day in it. She really did. It was kind of cool.
That's wonderful.
This is the type of camera that they would use, and as you can see, that accordion thing in the middle allowed the front of the camera to move up and down and back and forth. That's called shift, tilt, swing. And back in the day with field cameras, they all did this. The front of the camera would move, and as you move it up and down, you can be down low and move the lens up, and it looks like you're at a higher level. So that's part of the reason that they use these cameras the way that they did. Today's DSLRs and handheld cameras don't do that. Even if you have a tilt shift lens, which I did use some, it's really not the same as a field camera. So this is the camera, the film camera that I ended up getting, ordered it from Japan. It's an old Fujifilm GX680 with a bunch of different lenses and stuff, but it had that tilt shift swing on the front, so I could go out and actually replicate some of what the Burgerts did with that particular look. And so off I went. This is what it looks like looking through the view of that camera, and here's a better shot. The interesting thing in this is actually a reversed view because you're looking into a mirror. And so what's left is right and what's right is left. And you talk about confusing. If it looks like you need to move the camera this way, you really need to move that way. So it really kind of takes your brain a little bit of adjusting to use a camera like that. But nonetheless, that was the process. Old film cameras don't meter themselves like they do. There's no auto on old film cameras. And so I actually had this light meter, but every time you go into a certain situation, metering what it looks like, figuring out what the exposure needs to be as far as the shutter speeds and apertures and all of that was part of the deal. And again, part of the thrill, because these days doing it in automatic is what a lot of folks do. But that was part of the process and part of the equipment. Then getting to review the negatives after I developed them in the kitchen and in the bathroom, and getting to put them down on a light table. It's again just so cool to be able to do that and to see what it all looked like ahead of time. And when that large camera wouldn't work, this was the first camera I ever had, and I was able to use some of that. It's a 35 millimeter, and obviously it was a Canon A1, but got to use some of that as well and really break out into developing films more. So awesome stuff. This is what it would look like, on my way out. Several cameras and lots of equipment and stuff, but again, and notice the Germex up there.
I was just going to say, you've got your COVID.
I've got my COVID precautions in there. So that's what it would look like as I headed on out. The idea was to replicate. This is an image, and night photos with the Burgert collection are somewhat rare because of the difficulty in shooting film at night. The dynamic range is what it's called in film is significantly less than it is in the digital photograph. Look at how contrasty this looks. Super, super bright lights, and it's really hard to even see into the shadows. And so you don't have a lot of range of light that film could see, especially back in the day. But doing pixel peeping on a photo like this, did you know that there was a Piggly Wiggly in Ybor City right across from what was this?
Centro Español.
Centro Español, as well as this was 16th Street before they put in Centro Ybor in the development down there. And here's what it looks like today. A lot more detail. I've got lights flashing right into the lens, but nonetheless, I can get a heck of a lot more detail and still have curious people like, what is this guy doing with his camera over there? Absolute blast just going out and doing, and people would see this stuff, and they'd see this monster camera up on a pole and come over and talk about it and reminisce, and that was part of the thrill of doing this project. So what I did was I would go into the collection and I would think about, all right, I want to reshoot this and I want to reshoot this, but my brain isn't what it used to be. So I then created a map on Google Maps and put the images in there with it so that I could actually see, this is Dale Mabry. I could put a little mark on there, all right, I want to stop and shoot here, and then I could put the preview of what it looked like at one time so I could sort of replicate that. And that's how I started doing it, but that turned out to be more of a hassle. And here I am trying to get a little bit higher. That is a 12 to 14 pound camera. So holding it up, trying to keep it steady and hit the shutter button at the same time had its challenges, but nonetheless, that's part of how I did it. Then I started, all right, well, let me take this really to the next level, and started walking around with a tripod and a ladder and all of that, just again, trying to replicate what the Burgerts did. So that's the idea behind getting a camera a little bit higher and dealing with some of that distortion and just having a ball going around shooting some of that. So I got about halfway through the project and I started comparing the images side by side. Here's what the Burgerts did. Here's what my stuff looks like on film. And as you can see, very similar, that the black and white from the Burgert and the black and white from what I did, they look very similar, and that's part of what I was looking for. But what I did was I then contacted some editors that I know around. Boyce Alhosey, who is a deputy editor at the Tampa Bay Times, a brilliant photographer. David Warner, who I shot for with Creative Loafing and who's now with DuPont Registry, and sent out these photos and said, what is a better comparison of the then and now? Here's the black and white next to the black and white, and here's the black and white next to the color. And it was pretty unanimous that if you want to show what's happening in 2020, you show the color. Thus, there went the film camera, because I'm going to shoot the color stuff. I'm going to get the most dynamic that I can with the DSLR. So I had to go back and reshoot some photographs, but that was sort of the process as well. and that's what's in the book is the color next to the black and white, but still very dynamic and still sort of reminiscent. But as I talk about that, think of what it's like to look at a black and white photo. Here is this beautiful building on Davis Island, still there, incredible architecture, and you can see the blacks and the whites and the shadows in here, but here it is today in color. And so one of the things that the Burgerts had to deal with, and people who are viewing their photos, is this is black and white. You don't really get a replication of what it looks like live. And so that was part of the idea as well, is look at the differences, not only in how the buildings look, but what color photography brought to us as far as the medium is concerned. Many of the photographs, again, black and white, I started to notice, if you look up here in the sky, while the sun is shining very bright, you can see the shadows of this stuff next to the street. So that's a very bright sun. But as I looked up in the sky, I'm like, why isn't the sky bright like you would see today? There is a process in the wet darkroom, in an analog darkroom, that's called dodge and burn. And as you burn the paper, things get darker. And my thought is, and you can see it in some of their photos, well, that's what the Burgerts were doing. And almost every sky is a little bit darker. And that's kind of what I went with for a while until I shot a little bit more. And then I remembered, oh yeah, Tico was right down on the river spewing coal ash everywhere. And so a lot of what we see in the Burgert photos is pollution. Oh, yeah. And I think this is the coal yard that was down next to the old Tico plant. Here's what it looked like, I want to say in the 30s. So now they had 3 stacks, and they were a little cleaner with it all. And eventually they moved out to Hooker's Point. Here's what's there now. This is the Channel 8 building, and right next to that used to be the old Tampa Tribune printing presses and that kind of thing, and that all changed a couple of years ago, and they built this apartment complex. And here I am. I'm going to be a Burgert. When I grow up, I want to be a Burgert. So I wanted to try it. I wanted to stand up on my car and see what they saw and do it that way. And, you know, again, just for the experience and to see what differences it made from standing on the ground, and it was fun doing that. However, I couldn't, every place I went, couldn't go and take a ladder and a pallet to put on top of my car and climb up there and take the shot. So I tried to think of another way. Fortunately, these days, my camera and a lot of modern cameras have Wi-Fi. So what I was able to do was mount the camera on a really tall light stand, then put my phone on that same light stand so I could see what the camera saw up high, and then below that I had my tablet with the original photo on it so I could see it a little bit larger, so I could look at the phone, see what the camera was seeing, look at the old image, and do my very best to replicate it. And, you know, modern day, that's sort of how it was done.
That's really cool.
You made a comment to me some time ago that Burgerts used every technology, and if they were here today, they'd be photoshopping and all that stuff. Yep. So I'm like, okay, well, I've got free license to do
exactly.
to do however I need to do it to make this thing happen.
Exactly, including shooting color. And that's the thing, is they would have absolutely shot color.
Absolutely, yeah. And so here's what it looks like when I'm out shooting. This camera is, I don't know, 10 feet high. I'm down here looking at my phone and looking at my tablet, and that was sort of the process of how I got some of these buildings shot. Another challenge had to do, well, let me talk first about some of the mistakes in the book as I went around and shot some. I was told relatively quickly that I made a mistake about the highlight fronton. Don't mess with Tampa people's highlight. Oh, they don't mess with my highlight, because that's old Tampa, and a lot of people were invested in what highlight was all about. Unfortunately, the very last line of this paragraph, the year is wrong. It was indeed July 4th, but it was like 1989 instead of 1979. So editing problem on my part, but people picked it up and ran with it relatively quickly as far as the mistakes were concerned here. This is another one. Rod and I were just talking about this. So this is the Standard Oil station at the corner of Henderson and Dale Mabry, which makes sense to me. It's a wedged shape plot. So there's this transmission stored there. I think I've got it here. Yep. Perfect sense. So what they did was this building eventually transitioned into, the Standard station eventually transitioned into this. That's what I thought anyway. And so on I went and I printed the book. until I kept accessing the library's collection and was able to see some aerial photos. I won't go into what this, here, this is an aerial photo, and here's an example.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to see it very well, but that's it. This is on the opposite side. This is actually where the Publix is. For those of you who know Tampa, this is where the Publix is, and this is now TD Bank. But this is where that standard station, the only way I knew is because of the shape of the station.
Yeah.
And so what I could do is actually blow this up a little bit because I had some of the high-res images. And that's what it looked like. So another mistake in the book, but it's all about learning. All I had as far as knowledge was concerned is talking to folks like Rodney, newspaper archives, which again, just my own rabbit hole of looking in all these old newspapers, and facts and figures that I could find on the internet. That's all I had to go with, so I did the very best I could, and yet wound up with maybe a couple of errors that I'll correct at some point. This also led to some problems with me. This is on the USF website. This is a beloved clinic that was in Ybor City, and as I posted some of this stuff, people say, yeah, I know that place, and my family went there, and I got my tonsils out there and things like that. It says on the website, this is on the corner of 7th Avenue and 14th. It's not. I couldn't find it. I'm looking on Google, where is this thing, until I finally got this enlarged photo, and then I could see the street sign, and this actually says 9th Avenue. And it was right across the street from the 14th Street cigar factory, which VM Ybor built. It was the first huge brick factory, and then it started to make sense. But that was some of the stuff that I was up against as I was putting this book together, is some of this misinformation. The Burgert Brothers on 7th Avenue, on the USF side, it says 608 Madison Street. It's not. And so I finally found it, and again, it was on 7th Avenue. And even once I found it, it was really difficult determining where on 7th Avenue it was because I didn't have a good address. You see some of these lines running through this print. This was actually printed on a glass negative, and the glass broke, but they were still able to make a print out of it, but that's what it looks like from a glass negative. So what I did was I went about trying to figure out where this was. I saw this little bit of detail right here in this building next door, and for whatever reason, it sort of rung a bell for me. Google Maps, again, was just the coolest technology. I could drive down the street and see what was where, and as I drove down on Google Maps, I could actually see that little mark up there in the building. And so I knew that's where it was originally, but then I had to research because it's not a 3-story building anymore. I went into the store and said, do you know anything about the history? Yeah, I know that it was 3-story. It's still zoned for 3-story, but they rebuilt it as 1. And so that was, again, some of the challenges that I had. And here's what it looks like today. It's a Agora Ybor, I guess. A cool little store, still red bricks, and you can still see that little detail right up here, which is kind of what I keyed into as I was doing the burgers. Here's another one. This was on the internet and in the collection as Jake Walker's Townhouse Restaurant. Cool, at 1220 Dale Mabry Boulevard. Sweet. I'm going to go out, I'm going to find 1220 Dale Mabry Boulevard, and I'm going to reshoot it. And indeed I did, and I went and looked. This is 1220 Dale Mabry. And that's not what that's not what this original shot looked like. Digging in some more, as I did some pixel peeping into that original photo, I was able to see that this sign was actually in front of it, closed on Monday, visit the Townhouse Restaurant. But that's what this was supposed to be. So what that really told me was, this isn't the Townhouse. And as I looked at it closer, it turns out that it was the chicken and chips, or whatever the original one was. Bottom line is, this is what it is today. And the one way that I could tell is this little post right here is the same one that held the sign here. So that same concrete pad that was out there is still there today. Looks very different, but that's sort of what keyed me in on, all right, this is a correct one. Composition was a really big deal. It still is in photography, but these guys were masters of it. Look at the bottom of this, these converging lines at the bottom of a photo just sort of draw your eye in and put it back out. So to replicate something like that, had to get up high and shoot really from the same angle, and it looks so much different today. Still able to get the wall in there, but now Columbus Park, is there, and Bayshore looks very different. Compositionally, again, if there's a car in the shot, this is the Cuban Club, put a car in the shot. It's easy to just kind of hang out and wait till a car comes by and really just do my very best to replicate what I saw in their image. Lighting, another really big deal. I didn't want to just go and shoot the building. I wanted to shoot it the same way that they shot it. And if you look at the front of the Tampa, Florida brewery, which is what it was called then, the front of it is very illuminated. The side of it is not. This is what I was talking about, some of the dodge and burning. You see how it's kind of bright and dark. It's imperfect when you do it. Nonetheless, I wanted to shoot it the same way. And so, as you might guess, technology helped. There's an app that I can have on my phone, and you can as well. And it helps me understand where the sun is going to be at any time of day. This is what it looked like when I took it. And this is what the app looks like. So I can hold the app up and I can say, all right, well, the sun's going to be right there at 2 o'clock. That's when the light's going to be on the front of this building. Or I can do it from my house because I have directions. And I can see where the light's going to be and when, because the idea for me, again, was to really replicate the light and how it hit the building. And that was part of the challenge as well. You and I were talking about this shot earlier. Downtown Tampa was thriving as far as retail was concerned, and people going down there to just really experience life. And you can see that here. Folks, this is Franklin strolling up and down the boulevard, the cars and the life that was there. W Woolworth is a really important building historically in Tampa. It's where the sit-ins happened in the 60s, I believe, which really led to a lot of desegregation in Tampa because people had the courage to go and do that. But here's what it looks like now. They decided in the 80s, I want to say, to turn Franklin into a pedestrian mall, so they narrowed it, I think with the intention of making it a little more walk-friendly.
Yeah.
It didn't work.
Never really worked, no.
But it's also an example of I can't light everything the same way because now it's surrounded by tall buildings and stuff, so I can't get some of the
strong shadows.
Right.
The big buildings.
And this building, I guess, is still in play. They're trying to figure out what to do with the crest block.
Yeah.
They did touch up photographs. You know, we have Photoshop today, which makes it a heck of a lot easier, but they had one of the best retouchers, and I've got her name, Roberta Lewis, who worked back in the shop. They would retouch negatives as well as prints. This did not look like this when you went and looked at the building, but they were commercial photographers. So what do they want to do? They want to really show the brand. We still do that in commercial photography today. And so they got the retoucher to really kind of amp up what the sign looked like.
Well, in this one, if you can zoom in, they actually changed hands. So the building name on the front facade is over to the left. If you look up top left, you see the building name.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so but the building changed hands. The cigar factories changed hands. And
Several
so
times.
They wanted to go, they didn't change the building,
right,
but they want to change the advertising.
We'll just paint a sign up there.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of them did have them painted, but just awesome stuff. And they did a lot of touch up. People have asked, do you do anything with the Burgert photos as far as retouching is concerned? The answer is absolutely no. Some of them are really rough shape, and it would take me 2 minutes in Photoshop to really dress them up and make them look better. But it's a matter of sort of honoring their art and honoring the people who printed the photos and letting history be, not changing it the way that I think it should be. Here's another example, Las Novedades in Ybor City, which is now Hoya Hotel, I think.
Oh yeah, the IO Hotel, yeah.
Yep. You can see the sky and the wires here. They took it back and touched it up some, and this is the way it looked after they retouched it. So masters as far as that was concerned as well. I want to show my building. I don't want to show wires and all that stuff, so they could go and fix the negatives and the prints. And this is, again, just kind of a final shot of what happens in downtown. This is what it looked like, I think, pretty much when I first moved here. And from Davis Island, I could see, you might remember Mirabella's and Wolf Brothers and some of the other things that you can see from here in the old City Hall. And here's what it looks like now. Very, very different. And yet still a cool city, but just very different in what we saw and what we see. And so showing those differences has been kind of what this project is all about. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of folks in Tampa who they just enjoy it. They like the reminiscing. They like the ability to look back, and because so many of these photos just really push buttons for them. They can see what that looks like.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And so we're going to obviously have some more, a little more from Chip, but we actually have a couple questions already
Awesome.
from the online audience. And if anybody in the audience here present, like to hear your questions too, but want to real quick address a couple of the online questions. So when comparing the historic photos on your iPad, as you're using, to the view on your camera, when it was on top of the car, how did you adjust the view? Were you climbing up and down, or did you actually have to move your car a few times?
Well, remember that a camera is on a tripod, so it can move back and forth. And yeah, I had to move it a couple of times just because looking through a lens, it's kind of funky. When we look at it with our eyes, one wall goes this way and one wall goes that way, and it looks square. But depending on what lens you're looking through, this wall may bend a little bit. By moving, you sort of adjust the view of the wall, and that was part of the importance of replicating some of these things. So had to move the car, had to move the camera, yeah, absolutely. Move it up and down and zoom it in and out some. Yeah.
Again, it's all those different angles, all those the X, Y, and Z axis you have to
right.
deal with.
Yeah, exactly right.
So another question is, do you have any plans to match the photos geometrically and provide a website where you can have them overlaid and kind of do the slider, to see the old and the new and really see where they merge together?
Yeah, there are some of those online already. I'll plug my website there, and it's chipshots, chipshotz.com. And there are, I'm going to say 5 or 6 there. I don't currently have that. It's not too difficult to do, but it's sort of time consuming putting those sliders together. But at some point, absolutely, because some of these photos really are line for line. You can follow the curb on the street in this one, and the curb is in the same place on the ones that I shot. So that's part of the reason I shot them that way, is so that the slider could happen.
Exactly. Well, until then, you have the book.
That's right.
You can get the book.
Sell those books. There are some online, and eventually I think that a good part of this collection will end up there as well. I'm still shooting, by the way, still doing some of this stuff, so haven't spent a lot of time putting it online yet, but thanks for the question.
Any questions in the audience here?
Please.
Between the research and digging up the photos and then going out in the field and trying to line everything up and develop it, curious, if you get that book, it's a fantastic book, I bought a copy.
Thank you.
How much time did you invest to get that book?
So the question is, for those online who maybe didn't hear it, is really how much time through the research and the photographing and looking at the photos and all of that. Just days and days and days. I would say from the time I started to the time the book went out, I would say probably 6 months, but that was, and my wife will be glad to tell you, she had to encourage me away from it. It just became an obsession. And so digging down into those newspaper articles and finding out, and I think there's something inside of us that, we search for something. When we find it, at least in my brain, get that little rush of endorphins, and then it's crack. I got to do that again. So doing the research and finding the stuff and making those pieces fit together was part of it. So obsessed probably for 6 months, and still just really working on it and still putting a lot of time, but probably 6 months from start to finish on the book. And thanks for the question. Please.
Question. So they had 19,000 pictures over 16 years.
Yes.
Were the majority commercially requested, or some of these others that interested in how these pictures evolve?
You want to answer?
Well, so you can definitely want you to join in too, but there may have been more than 19,000, and so that's the other thing, is we have what's left that was saved by the Friends of the Library and others and collectors. But the Burgerts took these commercial photographs of street scenes, but they also took a lot of studio portraits, and even like the photograph of their Ybor City studio, you can see where there's portraiture in there. And I think some of the big glass room that they had might have been to allow the light in.
Exactly right.
for that studio portraiture. But for the most part, they were certainly paid to take those pictures. They actually were also paid by the newspapers. And so you'll see a lot of credits in the Tampa Tribune and the Tampa Daily Times, where the Burgert brothers were the ones who were out taking these photographs. Of course, the Tribune and Times had their own, and the papers in St. Pete had their own staff photographers, but early on particularly, it would be expensive to have a staff photographer and then to have all the equipment to in the darkroom to develop those things. So it was more economical and early on in the newspapers when they began printing photographs to actually hire the Burgerts out to do that. And so you'll find some photos in the library's collection or other collections, including our own, where you might see that they were in the newspaper, particularly for advertisements, and that's where they were really retouched.
Big deal.
And so lots of retouching went in with that, like again, clearing out those power lines and things like that.
But I did see a lot of photos of families, weddings, not necessarily in a studio, a lot of street scenes, a lot of the photos that they have. I think they were leaning into being one of the first stock photography collections because they just have view of street scene. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't necessarily for any commercial use unless someone needed a street scene shot.
They also did produce postcards, though.
Yes, they did.
And so then they shot for postcards. And so I think a lot of those street scenes, they were used for commercial purposes, but for tourism purposes, for postcards.
But by all means, go to the library website and, you can put in your search terms and see portraits or whatever. The search engine there is pretty good. Take you around and let you see some of really what they did. Just fabulous stuff. I mean, even back when they first started, just really, really cool photographs. Yes, sir. The question is, out of the photos that I've taken, which one has changed the least? And I would say, like Las Novedades, a lot of the buildings in Ybor City that are still there, a lot of the clubs down there, the Cuban Club, the other mutual aid buildings still look very much the way they did back in the day. So I would say that those are probably the most that are still relatively the same. Yes.
How many of the 19,000 photographs have you been through?
The question is, how many of the 19,000 photographs have I been through? And I'm going to say 12,000 so far. And just a fascination. Yeah. One of the things that you can do on the library site, by the way, you can go to grid view, so you can see a whole page of 200 at once and then just kind of scan them, which is part of what I did. So listen, 12,000 is still a lot of photos, but there's an easier way to view them instead of just one at a time. Mm-hmm. But I've seen a lot of them. And it's funny, there's something in my brain, once I see a photograph, I can pretty much remember if I've seen it before. So as I'm going through them, some of them are labeled 3 different ways. Mm-hmm. in the library collection. Some of them are mislabeled. And so I've given my input to the library about that too. Yes, please.
I'm curious, some of those cigar factories find those photos, how many of those?
Once this project is done, I'm considering actually doing the cigar factory spread. There were 126 cigar factories at one point.
Yeah, and it's hard to really tell because there's the large scale factories like the Upman factory that was featured here, and there's several in here. You have the Carabadisca and several others. Right. The current Cuesta Rey factory, but you also had a lot of other smaller factories, and so when that number of how many there were is a bit hard to gauge, but there certainly were over 100 medium and large scale factories between Ybor City, West Tampa, and Palmetto Beach. And there's maybe, actually, where's Manny? There's maybe 15 or 20 left large cigar factories.
Last I was aware about
24. There you go. So a couple dozen of the large cigar factories left, including 2 wood, manufactured of wood, and the rest are brick.
There are still some small ones. I actually came across one the other day on Main Street close to Howard. It's been a barbecue chicken place.
I know that one.
It's still there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, some of them are still around. And listen, I invite anybody who's interested, look at some of the stuff and go look at these factories. Go look at the buildings. Some of them have been brilliantly rehabbed. Some of them are really falling into disrepair. And when they elect me king of Tampa, we have to do something with that stuff because one fire and they're gone, and that's not coming back. but I don't think there's any plans to do that. So.
There was a couple more questions
Good.
from online. Any photographs of the Jackson House? The Jackson House is the last of the African-American boarding houses that were in downtown Tampa and in the scrub on Central Avenue. It is in incredible disrepair, but we're hoping that through a lot of efforts from a lot of different organizations, the building can be rehabbed and have a new life. And unfortunately, there are not any photographs, at least the Burgerts took, of the Jackson House. There are really darn few photographs of that building or even the street that it's on, Zach Street. And so you have to find it, kind of like Chip was saying, where you have the subject of the photograph, but you might find some things outside of that. You can find some images of the Jackson House or where the house is in a photograph, but none of it just showing just the house itself. And again, the Jacksons didn't, they were a business family, and they did have some wherewithal, but they didn't or chose not to use the Burgerts to photograph. Actually, I just found a African-American commercial photography firm that was in the city directory in 1914, and so actually we're hoping to pursue what may have happened to that company and their photographs, because that is certainly a side of Tampa that the Burgerts didn't get to capture as much, or didn't capture as much.
Right.
And so, so another one, are there other people who are continuing the tradition of photographing the city as it changes? So is anybody doing that now?
That would be me. I don't know of any commercial firms that are doing it. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I would like the photos that I've taken, again, for the city or for the history center to have them at some point, just again as a preservation of what we have now. And my big hope is that an up-and-coming photographer 30 years from now will go to the same exact spots that I stood and take those photos again and really create this visual history of so much of what Tampa is, because it's such a cool city. And back in the day, I think it's one of the profound things that I learned is, Tampa we were just a village, late 1800s. And when they call it Cigar City, it really was Cigar City. Tobacco and cigars is what built Tampa, starting in Ybor City and then moving to West Tampa. And that's really the huge industry that we had. And as most folks know, it's really grown from that. This shot of the waterfront. Well, the waterfront wasn't cherished back then. Curtis Hickson Park was a rail yard, and a functional one. And so the things that have changed, and I hope someone picks it up and runs with it long after I'm gone, just because, let's hope so, that someone's doing that.
Exactly. And it's great that you're doing that. And actually, you mentioned Curtis Hickson. Not only are there photographs that document the kind of rail aspect of Curtis Hickson, but the Burgerts were around just long enough to see the beginning of the transition. You actually have in your book a picture of Curtis Hickson Hall, the first convention center. So before this convention center, the one that is at the location of Curtis Hickson Park, which was the old hall. So it's great to see that transition. So yeah, you can do that now, and then again 30 years from now, hopefully there's still a park there.
Fun fact: Curtis Hickson was the mayor of Tampa and died in office, and so that hall was named after him by the following mayor, and I don't remember his name, but that's the kind of stuff that makes my wife crazy, because did you know? And you just see her eyes kind of rolling about, oh, really? Here we go.
Exactly. We are actually going up on over 45 minutes.
Okay.
So do we have any more questions of folks in the audience, or I'm going to do one more pass for questions online? And I know there's so many more photographs that we could talk about. We could sit here all day and do this, for hours on end.
I'm up for it.
But I really want to thank you again for taking your time, not only to be here with us for the past almost hour, but for taking the time to do this book.
Yeah.
It really is a treasure, and we appreciate it and can't wait for volume 2.
And 3.
Yeah.
If I can answer any questions for anybody, or if you have questions about the collection, I don't consider myself a Burgert collection expert, but would love to talk over with you what the collection is. By all means, look at USF's digital collection, and certainly the Hillsborough County Library. They have been incredibly helpful, and they're incredibly gracious in helping me and making that collection available to all of us, not only online, but you can go down and actually see some of the prints. You got to make an appointment to do it, but you can. So great collection, great people, and thanks to them. Thank you, Rodney. What an honor. I'm kind of fanboy with Rodney because the guy just knows so much about Tampa, and I just want to pick his brain. But thanks to you and the History Center for doing this stuff and for being such a support to the city of Tampa.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much.
And do one more thing about the library. Not only do you go to the Burgert Brothers section and find the 8x10 photographs, but you have to go to a second section to find the circuit prints.
That's right.
And so the circuit prints, those some of them are 3 feet wide.
Yeah.
They're just incredible. And they only took them for a certain span of years. I guess I don't know. Actually, we have some time. If you actually don't mind talking a little bit about that, you didn't use any in here because the format is so wide.
That's right.
But just if you could just give a minute or two about circuit photography, why it was important, why it was used, and really when the heyday was of that. And can you do that today? How do you do that today?
I'm going to answer your last question first, and that is yes, you can. There are certainly techniques available today where you set your camera up in certain settings and you can just sweep across, and then in certain programs like Photoshop, stitch them all together, and then you can crop it however you want. So if you want to make it super wide, especially with high resolution cameras today, absolutely. And you can make it 20 feet long and still have really good reproduction with that. I don't think there was a high demand for that format simply because, as you just mentioned, they're so big, and what do you do with them? The camera itself, there were several different techniques for doing it. One of them was actually motorized, where it did exactly what I just talked about. But it would have film in the back of the camera, and as the lens moved, a motor would drive the film. And so as the lens moved, the film would as well, and they could take a broad panoramic of that. That's not the way the circuit camera ran. It just took super wide with certain lenses and stuff. I've never seen it up close, so I don't know the exact technology, but I just don't think there was a super high, I mean, I don't get a lot of demand for wide panos of my shots either. I think they're
Yeah.
cool. I could fill, a wall with them. I just don't think there was a lot of demand for that. But
Yeah, that's the thing is, that's the dimension is difficult.
Yeah.
They actually would sell rolled up postcards that were those panoramic views, and you could put them in a little cylinder and mail them off.
Yeah.
We actually reproduced 3 Burgert Brothers circuits on our 3rd floor gallery, one of downtown Tampa, one of downtown St. Pete, and one of Tarpon Springs.
Nice.
So anybody comes to the History Center, you can check those out. But those are breathtaking.
Yeah.
Because of just the expanse of them. So thanks for going into a little bit about circuits.
Glad to do it.
So if we have no more questions, we really appreciate everybody both who is here in person and also who either tuned in live or is watching this after the fact. And because of the nature of the internet and these things being virtual, and you can watch this at any time, please feel free to take advantage of our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. Watch these videos, but also if you have questions, even though maybe you're not watching it live, you can just put a comment or a question, either direct it to the History Center. You can go to Chip's website and direct it there, and we'd be happy to tackle that question. And again, really appreciate you all being here, braving our first hybrid event, and those who are watching at home. Thank you all so much.
Thanks.